Hello and welcome to the 𝗤𝗏𝗃. This is a platform where you maximize your learning potential with the power of networking and experience. A platform where you come together and with a various backgrounds and provides the opportunities to meet and have the endless possibilities in all sorts of careers. We have over more than 50,000 members in the dynamic and diverse. This is a platform where you maximize your learning potential with the power of networking and different backgrounds. A platform whether you are a seasoned professional and just together and 𝗤𝗃𝗃 provides a space to learn from others and share your experience just to expand your horizon. I'm your host, Rahul, and today we have a guest, Sarthak Gupta. He is a senior developer engineer intern was in 𝗤𝗃𝗃𝗴𝗲 and Navazan. He has the ranks of the Code Chef, global rank 4, Code Chef global rank 8, Google hash code rank of 518, and Indian rank of 86. He has with his background, he has the strong knowledge of the coding, and today he's gonna share about his experience about the competitive coding and about this. So, Sarthak?
Yeah, sure. So this talk will mainly comprise of what ICPC is and what my experience to it was and how I think one should go about preparing for ICPC. So to begin, ICPC is a well-reputed team-based college programming contest. It generally comprises of members, 3 to 4 members, where the actual contest is going to take for 3 members only. The 4th member is generally as an additional member in case as a reserve, if you would call it. Each team is supposed to have a coach, which is generally a professor that you may know in your college. And in technical terms, you're going to be representing your college throughout the competition. So why someone would participate in such a contest is basically the prestige and the reputation that comes with ICPC. ICPC is one of the oldest programming contests that is out there. And when you have to provide any amount of credentials, this is one good achievement that you have. Apart from that, the experience of meeting various other coders along the offline regionals and the thrill of giving those contests is an amazing experience in itself. So that kind of experience is generally not available in major other contests because having so many people coordinated is in itself very hard, which is done through these contests. Now, like, as I said that you're going to have to form teams for ICPC. It generally involves competitive programming in a typical fashion. So it's obviously required that the team members that are going to be there are actively involved in competitive programming and have a good grasp of it. But it's also important that as it is a team contest, when you're deciding a team, it's not always the best part that you take all the 3 good programmers and they'll form a good team. Generally, when you form a team for ICPC, it's required that the 3 people of cover major area. Like it could be such that two of my friends and me are not that good at coding, but three of us together are very good. Something of that sort happens when one of the person is good at some set of problems and the other is good at other set of problems. So together they form a better team than two people having the same knowledge, even if it's. You should focus that your team has good coordination. So what I mean by good coordination is, in ICPC style of contest, what is going to happen is three people are going to code on one single laptop. So when you code on one single laptop, coordination becomes key, because it is not like a typical competitive programming contest where you're just coding on a laptop thinking along with coding. When three people are coding on the same laptop, you also need to coordinate that when someone is going to code, how sure about each problem one is, so that you should start coding. And then again, for as it's a team contest, it's not that you solve one problem and he'll solve the other problem. It is often the case that some part of a problem is solved by you and some help is required from the other person. So communication is also important. So generally, the practice strategy as a team would be that you simulate the actual contest. So what I'm saying is, what people do wrong is that when they try to simulate try to give practice contests, they would give contests on three laptops and give it like normal competitive programming contests. And that generally does not simulate the exact things that you're going to get there. Now, what happens is, then when you're coding in the offline rounds, you're going to get a single system, and because you're not used to those systems of coding, or that environment of coding on a single system, you generally lag behind your performance than it could have been. Then there is also the part of the timings, because it's a 5-hour contest. So generally what a 5-hour contest means is that you generally going to skip one meal per se, because the timing is generally, typical timings about 10 to 3 or 11 to 4 for a 5-hour contest for ICPC. And in that typically means that you're not going to have your lunch. And if you're not going to have your lunch, you cannot simulate it just for one day. What really happens is people lose their interest in about 3 hours, and the last 2 hours for ICPC go very unproductively. So that should not happen, and maybe preparing for that pre-hand helps. Also, because like it's a single system and you need to code the problem that you're most sure of. In an ICPC contest is different from a normal CP contest in ways that the points are based on number of problems solved. So it does not matter if you solve a hard problem or an easy problem, both of the problems have same points. So it's about which problem can be coded faster and which problem are you most sure about. So that problem is generally coded first. Then it is also suggested that obviously you formed your initial teams on the perspective that three people cover different areas, sets of problems. It is also suggested that whatever sets of topics that you're going to cover in further are also divided firsthand, so that you already decide that this set of topics were passed on to one person and this set of topics were passed on to the other person. So that basically reduces load to a typical competitive programming who would have to complete and go through all of the syllabus. And also, the past contests are the best practice material out there. So if you try to give the past contest as an actual contest, or maybe on Codeforces Gym, you try to give it as a virtual contest, it generally is the best practice material and serves for most of your typical scenarios that you would get in an actual contest. Then there obviously comes that is how you prepare for a team. What individual steps one should take is, because the typical competitive programmer syllabus and everything obviously counts when you're preparing for ICPC as well. But one needs to understand that for ICPC, it's more required that you focus more on having extra knowledge on DS and algo. When you cover more number of data structures and algorithms, it is more suggested, because in typical Codeforces contests that you would give, you would focus more on critical thinking. It is often noted that if you're giving a Codeforces Dev 2 contest, you would probably solve the first 3 contests with hardly any knowledge of data structures and algorithms. But that generally does not happen in ICPC because the focus primarily is on more data structures and algorithms. So there's a little shift there, not by a large amount, but it's there. Then absolving that you do after practice contest also needs to be in two parts. It's not just that you absolve and realize what your mistakes was. It's obviously important that you give your feedback to other teammates, also realize that where coordination's mistakes happens and where you felt that if you had solved X problem first, it would have been better. Or if you had given more time to Y problem combined would have been better. Those things help so that you recognize as a team that where you're failing, or maybe if you need to shift some topics from one person to the other, that is also helpful. Also, in an ICPC contest, you're not allowed an internet or any slight of copy pasting or code from a source. So that shifts from what you would be used to in normal contests. So for that, what ICPC does is you'll be allowed a 24 pages template that you can take pre-hand, and you can look at it and type from it. That's obviously has slower because you're going to have to type the template down, and also brings you to the part that you have to make your own 24-page template that suits your team well. So the best strategy that our team found was to develop the template was to we iteratively, when giving practice contests, found that's repertory overall. Also, because when you're coordinating with two people, and it's often going to be a case that because you've divided the topics, the problem could require both the topics from different persons. So abstraction of your problem generally helps. What I mean by abstraction, let's suppose a problem requires two topics, A and B, and A part is done by one person, and B part is done by the other person. So coordinating well enough that you both can intermix each other's codes is only possible if you've practiced pre-hand for and ready for those kinds of situations. So that kind of coordination is often required, and I have seen in live contests also that has happened, that one of my teammates would have to do one part of the problem and the other part would have to be done by me. Apart from that, I'll now probably focus more on how general problem solving approach would apply to ICPC problems, and this will obviously cover more of competitive programming problems also. So the typical idea would be that because the more you solve on pen and paper rather than solving while coding, it's more better, because the more refined your idea is, the less time you will be spending on your laptop typing and not really being sure, and the more chances you'll have to clear things out when you type it out. That way you save both your time on your laptop and you generally have clearer ideas when you're typing your code. I'll probably open to we had a lot of questions, so I'll probably open to that, and if some of the questions could be put up.
Mm-hmm. Actually, yeah, since we talked about like ICPC and how important is the three people in the code in single laptop is, like it's very different than the other competitive codings, right? So
yes,
when you're working on a team, you are heavily relying on the other person as well. So what are some strategies that you use to work efficiently with your teammates?
So what generally happens is we obviously need some kind of objective matters that we do. What our team did was that one strategy was that first you rank the number of submissions that each problem has. That obviously, if a problem has more number of solved submissions, that means that that problem is easier and can be solved faster. So one way is to decide is solve in the order of most number of submissions. And as soon as someone is sure of if it's how big a code is, you code the shortest codable and most sure problem first. So if like if I have solved one problem and my teammate has also solved one problem, we amongst ourselves need to decide that which code is shorter and which code we are most sure about. Like before starting to code, we need to both be sure that which problem is more likely to pass, because there is often a case that you code your solution down and after your submission you realize that there was some problem that you hadn't figured out, some corner cases that you hadn't figured out. So that kind of assurance comes when you practice, and is often more likely that the person that has more experience is a better judge to that. So like if two people have a clash, I think it's a better strategy either to go by which problem has more number of submissions, or which of those two have a more experience towards solving problems.
Mm-hmm. And as they need to solve which code will be solved first, it has to have the experience, right? So
Yes.
what are some key skills and the knowledge areas that are very important for ICPC? Like you have mentioned, you guys were like much more focused on the data structure and algorithm. So can you elaborate about that?
Yeah, so a few of the data structures that ICPC generally focuses around is like there are often questions that will come on hashings, and there are often questions that involve range sum queries, various data structures that you can use. Graph is one thing that you will obviously have in your ICPCs, and some basic algorithms like BFS, DFS, Dijkstra's, Bellman-Ford. These obviously come in ICPC and are most likely there. Problems that involve trees and involve some kind of observational patterns or Euler tools are often there in ICPC. There are also problems that involve basic maths and strategies like what you'll storm like GCD or set theory, and things like that are obviously there. Apart from that, you also have problems that involve DPE, and problems that are generally observational or greedy in nature are also there. Interactive problems are often very infrequent in ICPCs because interactive problems generally tend to be tedious when testing your codes.
Mm-hmm. So this would be for someone like who is very much professional and have been doing some sort of competitive codings, so they will have this kind of background knowledge.
So generally what happens in ICPCs is you like have a clearing rounds, like knockout rounds kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
For India, what would you'll go through a procedure called, first you'll have a prelims that is open for all. Then you have a regionals that is generally on site. And what happens in a region for getting selected from prelims to regionals, generally there is a criteria of being in some number of slots for each regional. And then there is also the criteria that generally, not exactly, but one team per college is allowed to be there. It's not hard strict rule. There's some exceptions to it, but generally one team per college is there. So it is generally assumed that some prior experience is obviously going to be there when you're participating for regionals. But when you're participating for prelims, obviously you can participate even if you don't have any prior experience to basically start. But it's generally suggested that you have some prior experience so that better results are achieved. And after regionals, generally what happens is each regional will have some number of slots for directly qualifying to world finals. And so like the regional will have a 5 hours on-site contest, and then they'll release the ranks maybe an hour or two later after the contest. And out of those one or two teams or number of slots, team would qualify for the world finals. And like from 2019, there was also a mid round that was started known as Asia West. So what happens is for the Asia West regional, there are, I guess, 7 regionals, 3 from India. And there are also 4, like one from Bangladesh, one from Pakistan, one from Afghanistan, if I remember. So what happens is that all teams from those regionals, some teams from each regional would compete again for a spot in the world finals, and like some amount of teams qualify from the Asia West. So like, but the Asia West round is conditional; it doesn't happen each time. So when the Asia West round wouldn't happen, the regionals obviously has a higher number of seats for each participant. If you're looking to just start out for ICPC, if you don't have basic prior, it is generally suggested that maybe if you focus more on other coding platforms, competitive platforms first, rather than straight jumping from ICPC, it's a little better for you and smoother for you.
Mm-hmm. So what would you suggest for a newbie? What other competitive program platforms, and if someone who is just starting out, because who is a kind of newbie, they get imitated. By just looking at it and seeing it. So what would you suggest to them who want to get into ICPC but they don't have any prior knowledge? So they should start from which competitive programming?
So what I suggest for someone who's just starting out, to go to platforms like HackerRank, CodeChef, CodeForces. Priorly, HackerRank is a better platform for someone who's just starting out, because that really welcomes someone who has no experience whatsoever. Even if the person has no prior experience in coding, it's a good platform to start on. What one needs to understand is that you're obviously going to be scared the first time. You're not going to get it right. It's like when you start out something, you're not going to be excellent at it. It's going to come eventually when you grow. So what happens is when you start with such platforms, you will eventually build your knowledge. So through each day, you can solve a set of problems, and most of these platforms have beginner friendly courses. So they have beginner friendly problems. So you need to go through those first to get a hang of the things. And then it's probably suggested, once you start solving a bit of problems and you start getting the hang of what competitive programming is, to follow some kind of resource or a syllabus, so that iteratively you can build upon. The obviously clicking part is when you start as a complete fresher and you look at the problems, they hardly make sense to you, because it is a slightly different from straight away coding brute force solutions. It often requires optimizations, mathematical interpretations that is not there in, even if you had been coding before, because competitive coding becomes a little different than typical coding. So what happens is when you try along these platforms, you'll get better eventually, and then it'll start making more sense to you to take part in contests and prepare for ICPC and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you said, they should go with a certain syllabus when they're starting out. So, what can you suggest something, a place where can they practice from a topic wise, if they want to practice certain topic?
If they want all these three platforms allow you to practice topic wise. What you can do is you can search for problems topic wise, and CodeChef and CodeForces also has a place, like CodeForces blogs and CodeChef had discussed. So if you search for a particular topic, you'll get a lot of discussions in CodeChef, and in CodeForces you often get a lot of blogs and problems also related to a topic. So what CodeForces does is it tags each problem. It has tags associated with each problem. So if you specifically want to search and practice problems with some tag, you can get a list of those problems. Or if you want to search for blogs or tutorials related to some topic, those are also available. If you're just looking for study material and links to problems, there is also CP algorithms, CP Algo. That is also a good site. It provides you with reading material for each topic and gives you links of various problems that would be associated to each topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. For someone who don't know where to find that and just starting out. And what about someone who is a bit familiar with this coding platforms, and now they want to get a specialist? So a guidance for someone to doing a coding programming, but want to be a specialist on CodeForces.
So if someone wants to improve on CodeForces, what really happens is I suggest to first identify what one's problems is. The problem generally comprises of two types of general ideas to categorize what kind of problems you're facing in your improvement. One could be that if I give you a set of problems and you could solve it given infinite amount of time, and one is you just can't solve it with your current knowledge. If you can solve it, you just don't have enough time, I think practice is the best way to go for it. If you practice more and more, you'll get the flow and timing will start to improve and you'll start seeing results in contests. If something like happens that you are just not able to solve those problems, not even after contests or even during upsolvings or even after reading editorials, the best strategy is to look where your topic preparation is weak. So there could be a case that you just haven't read about some topics that were required to solve those problems, or there could be a case where you hadn't brushed up on that topic or you need to focus more on that topic. So the best idea would be to recognize what ideas and what topics were required to solve that problem, brush upon those topics and maybe practice a few other problems and the problems you aren't able to solve, and see if that improves your performance on those topics. And eventually, I think that covers most of the topics.
Yes.
And you should probably see significant improvement from there on.
Yes, brush up like the topics that you're not familiar with. And also, there is one thing that happens on these competitive programs sites such as HackerRank and CodeChef, when they are solving a certain problem, sometimes they are so imitated, like they don't want to check the solution when they can't really solve it, and they take enormous amount of time, probably sometimes 1-2 days. So what would be a certain right time amount that someone should give to a particular problem statement? And then after that, people also feel bad for looking for the answer and they just like, I will try to solve it by myself. So at that situation, what should they do? Should they accept the solution and look forward? And what is the right time they should spend on solving one problem?
Okay, the time could actually vary depending on what situation you're in. What I mean by situation is that if you're solving the problem for the first time, like you just read through a topic and then you're solving the problem related to that topic, I think given 1 or 2 hours, if you can't do it, you should just look at the solution. It will be better. But let's suppose what happens is if you look at the solution 1 or 2 days later, it's not good in that case, because what will happen is you just read through the material and you started solving and you couldn't solve, so you spent 1 or 2 days. It's better if you look at the solutions in the initial problems, but after you're done with 2 or 3 practice problems on the topic you just read, or maybe you think you have brushed upon, then maybe spending more time on solving the problem so that it gets stuck in your brain is okay. So 1 or 2 days per problem, if you have already gone through some set of problems related to the topic, is okay. But maximum 1 or 2 days is more than good enough. And I don't think anyone should feel guilty of reading solutions. What should happen is that whenever you read a solution, you should make sure that you understand what the solution is. You understand it well enough that if you have to explain it to someone else without looking at the solution, you're able to do so. And you're also able to apply that solution to other problems. So if you're like managing all these 3 problems, I don't see a problem in reading solutions. So even as of today, I read a lot of editorials because that is how you learn. So reading solutions is okay, but you need to make sure that you understand them well enough so that you can reproduce those solutions.
Yes, like there's nothing to feel guilty about when you look for the solution. Just make sure that you do understand it well. Yeah, and there's of course there's going to be this one question for everyone who is starting out just fresh and have never done a competitive programming before. The question is going to be, how much does the competitive knowledge programming helps in the future technical world? Like, how important is the competitive programming?
What actually would happen is the technical world, in my perspective, it's obviously going to be biased on my opinion and my experiences. What generally happens is there are a lot of roles even in the technical world. It's just not, you're not going for one technical role, right? You're going to have different kinds of roles. You can be designing websites, you could be building websites, you could be building new algorithms. So depending on your role, the amount that competitive programming is going to help you differs. But in a typical sense, if you are pursuing SDE roles, software development roles, But the current industry standard is that often those are going to require, just give me a minute. Often those are going to require, first things, I need to plug in my laptop, just give me a minute. So often you're going to require different kinds of coding round, then you're going to have to go. So DSA in those cases becomes an important part of what you're going to be asked around in interviews, and competitive programming is one way of helping you around. So like, let's say what you do to show off your skills in development is you build projects or go through hackathons, right? So DSA is also one part of aspect that is often looked in people that are applying for technical roles. So when you have good credentials in competitive programming, it is often helpful to segregate you through the process. And like, often I have received a lot of better results because of competitive programming, because the recruiters obviously recognize that some of my skills are what match what they want. So that really helps. Often it is role dependent in the sense that if you are developing or moving to more algorithmic side roles, it is more and more necessary. The more you move away from those kinds of roles, the lesser important it gets. So it needs to match somewhere with your interests as well.
Yes, it has to be like what role you're looking for, how relevant is that? And if it is relevant, then it's like it demonstrates your understanding and knowledge and how much effort you have put and the understanding of the concepts that you have done. So now let's just say someone who have a good knowledge of programming and they are joining some sort of contest. The one thing is like someone who is first doing his first contest of CodeChef or something, like how they will handle, how should they manage their pressure during the code first consent.
The best part about the competitive programming is that it's not something like your exams or job interviews. You need to understand in the end of the day, it's more like hobbies. Contests happen very frequently. So they happen about every 2 or 3 days. And you can screw up 1 or 2 contests or even every contest for that matter. It really doesn't matter till you're learning. So you need to understand that when you're solving problems, you do not have a very performance based approach. So even if you do not give every contest perfectly or you screw up some problems, it's okay. The more pressure you take, the worse your performance gets generally. Some pressure is good till it's productive. If you are taking pressure, and some people work better under pressure, if that is happening, that's okay. But what happens is you need to understand that it's more like a hobby for most people that do it on a long term. So you do not need to see it as you must perform well. It's that it's like playing a sport for a hobby. So if you do it and you're good at it, it's better not to take stress that I need to perform well. And you need to get this into your routine that contests happen every day and I go through them every day. And maybe a little enjoyment is also involved. If you're not enjoying competitive programming over a long term, there could be many reasons. And you obviously have to consider if you really even want competitive programming, what makes you excited about competitive programming is also important. So if you like competitive programming, so I think you should just think of it as solving problems in your free time. What's the worst that can happen? So worst case scenario, you're going to screw up some contests and you're not going to perform that well and you probably drop a few ratings. That really doesn't matter till you're enjoying your time. So should be more centered about solving. When you move to a more solving problems approach and do not see it as an exam, it gets better and better over time.
Yes, it's like you should really enjoy it, not get stressed out of it. You should enjoy the solving the problems that you have been put together. Yeah. So of course, in order to do that, you have to do it on the regular basis of your life. You have to constantly practice coding. in your day-to-day life. So how would you balance the demand of the competitive coding with the other aspect of your life, such as schoolwork, and how often should you participate in these competitions? Because people, they also overestimate it. They get overwhelmed. Like, if there is a competition coming, I have to participate. Like, how often should you participate
That varies on what you're aiming for and
in?
how much you like competitive programming and what aspects of your life are you sacrificing. So what happened was when I started competitive programming or like was at my peak of doing contests, at that time I would give almost contests daily. So like even two contests per day. But that was like the peak of it when I had almost nothing else to do and there was COVID period. So classes were almost negligent to be precise. But what happens is you need to balance is that you need to give as many contests that match your goal, because why I was giving so many contests was I was enjoying them, I was good at it, and I wanted to get those credentials that you generally get in competitive programming if you do it over a long time, those good performances that I was seeing. So if like you're not seeing those and you feel that maybe your time is well spent on other things, because it could happen is in which year of college you are in also matters, and how much time and importance other things in your life happen. Because let's suppose if I was to say as of today, I would have to give a thesis project for my bachelor's and there's also interns coming up. So in these scenarios, I cannot obviously give contests every day because that will hamper the other things. So I reduce the number of contests and I would probably give one per week or one per 2 weeks. But like when I have enough time, I should give them more frequently. So it's generally suggested when you're starting your coding generally a journey, it's like about your first year, second year of college, you should give contests more frequently, like 2 or 3 per week. And eventually, when you start exploring more areas, other areas, maybe development side, machine learning side, or other areas of that might interest you design wise, then you drop, and college wise you drop down the amount of contests that you give, and you probably give contests only on weekends, or you give a contest once a week when it's comfortable to you.
Mhm. And yeah, that's something is a good advice to people, because sometimes uh, some people tends to get involved in competitive coding more than their academics, and they was like, okay, yeah, my academics does not matter for that, like, but it does, because uh,
You
you
can't
should be
ignore
adjustable to it.
academics. Yeah, it
Yes.
should go in a balance, because your academics obviously, what would happen is like there should be a balance in the state that when companies are looking at your profile, they obviously look at what your academic commitment was as well. So that matters. That is not something that should be taken very lightly. Most often what happens is company often have criterias on your academic performance as well, because that is objectively measurable.
Yes. Yes. So only just not being and participating in this CP is very much, and ignoring your college performance is not a good idea. You should have to have in a balance. Now, can you describe your experience with ICPC, and what were the some most challenging problems you encountered, and also a ways or the approach that you had to solve them?
So generally, my experience with ICPC is a very great one actually. I went for regionals, two regionals this past year, and for one was for Gwalior region, one was for Kanpur regionals, and then I also went for Asia West regionals, Asia West finals for in the winter. And all of those contests were great. They had about 8 to 10 problems each. The generic approach, what I had while solving was first to go to every problem and first is to decide which problem to solve. It's not like blindly, because you do not know what problem is how difficult in the initial only, because no one solved it. So first was to identify which problem needs to be solved first. after deciding which problem I'm going to look at first, I go through the problem, and there's obviously going to be a lot of English involved and paragraphs that might not even be necessary to the question. So one is to first filter out the question and transform it to a mathematical form that is more acceptable and understandable to move forward with. Then what I would generally do is to break it down to some known problems that we know. So this is generally known as transformation in formal algorithm solving. So we transform the initial problem that we have to some other problems that might be known to us, and with some linear transformations we get it to a state where we can solve it, or that this is solvable by one of your teammates, or some part of it might be solvable by some of your teammates. So what I would do is first bring it down to a point where I think it's solvable. If I can do it on my own, that is great. Or I'd ask one of my teammates if he or she has any input on it, and that will be better. And in case, often what happens is that most questions have one tipping point, and any of your three teammates have one of those clicking points of that this is the observation that solves this problem. It's more than enough to go forward from there.
And can you talk about how did you first get involved with the competitive coding? What inspired you in starting events like ICPC or any other program?
So what really happened is that my college had my college programming society had an induction. So to get into the programming club, you had to give an introductory competitive programming contest, and based on your performance, we would be getting into it. So when I gave the contest, I performed very badly because that was my first contest per se, and I just had basic knowledge of C++. So I could not understand what those problems really meant. What I did after the contest was I went to my friends that performed well and understood what competitive programming is and how it's different from typical programming and coding out problems and what I should be doing. After that, what happened was I started giving contests after going through introductory courses and got better and better with it. Then a few of my seniors suggested that if I would be a part of their ICPC team, and it'll be great. And I asked what was their strategy and what ICPC is and what are we looking at. So they pretty much explained everything to me about what ICPC was, what their past performances was, and what they're planning to do. And I got involved with a team of my seniors. So the first time I gave ICPC was in my second year. And that was an online round. So I was with a team of me, comprising of me and two of my seniors. So that was how I got introduced and understood what basic dynamics of ICPC are and how you get into competitive programming. Generally, what happens around that phase is because it's your first and second year, and generally you have not explored through a lot of technical domains. So you have a lot of time on your hands. So at that time I was giving lots and lots of contests, like 1 or 2 per day, and it increased from that. So I developed a habit of giving contests and solving them and going through materials. Eventually what happens is you get to a point where you get good enough and you start exploring other fields as well, from moving away from competitive programming a little bit. Not giving them obsessively in like you used to.
That happens. Now, can you talk about any particular memorable moment or the experience that you have, particularly in ICPC?
To be honest, this year when we gave our regionals, it was the first regionals we gave was very memorable. What happened was, as I pointed that we also gave our practice contests as we would, and we would generally perform very poorly on those. We gave about 7 practice contests, and none of them, which I remember, we were making it to even the top 10 in the regionals that were the previous standards. And surprisingly enough, the day we were going to give our first regionals, 2 of my teammates were quite very ill. One of the teammate we didn't even think would be able to participate. So we had absolutely no hope of anything going well. But when we started going through problems, we were almost done with quite a lot of problems in the first 3.5 hours itself. So in the first 3.5 hours only, we were among the top 2 and 3. And so we felt that we should have maybe given us more chance, and we didn't give ourselves enough credit firsthand, and our performance just jumped out. The first regionals we gave also had like a problem. We also realized that they had mentioned it earlier, but we like you in that extreme pressure and tension, you just generally skip out some of the stuff. So what happens is that your system clock and the contest clock do not match exactly. So what can happen is your system clock could be 1 or 2 minutes behind what the actual timing is. So what happened is like we submitted according to our system's clock, we had submitted it on time, but according to the actual timer that was going on the contest side, it did not happen. So that was one experience that we learned, that you should look at the contest side's timing and not your clocks, because your clock would be far behind.
That's nice for sharing your experience. I hope that over the people who are watching, that they will also go and participate in the regional rounds and prelims as well. But surely that people will have this one question in their mind all the time: does winning the ICPC will help me landing jobs in FANG companies?
Again, in FANG companies, you have different roles. So if you're looking for more algorithmic roles, it generally helps give you a credential. What I can say is like, let's suppose you're looking for some roles. If you go to someone and you had a role, you obviously have to prove to him or her that you are good enough for that role. So ICPC is a very good credential that to have on your resume, that stands out and tells the other person that you have that certain kind of skill. So let's suppose if I was looking someone to design an algorithm for distributing some kind of loads, or maybe order allocation algorithms, I cannot obviously make two people code out an algorithm in an interview and check which one's better and maybe hire that person. So I would obviously give some basic problems. So the best, your credentials obviously helps, but it's not a guarantee that if you like do very well in ICPC and you will get a job in FANG. There is no direct correlation or guarantee that will happen, but it generally helps you. What happens is, in general, typical FANG roles for ones I applied is basics of data structures and algorithms is a very good knowledge that they're going to revise. And as ICPC basically revolves around data structures and algorithms, there is correlation in the preparation that would go for both. But I do suggest that if like you're doing it to get into, you're doing ICPC to get into FANG, it's like not a really good idea. What if you're preparing for FANG, you could directly prepare for FANG better than hoping that you prepare for ICPC and there'll be a clash in your preparation for FANG.
Yes, it's like if you're preparing for FANG, then do prepare for FANG. ICPC is like a path, or it's like a credential that will show that you do have a knowledge that requires to solve a certain set of problems.
Yeah.
And also, just to sum it up, like one last question: as someone who has participated in the competitive coding competition, can you share some tips or the strategies for the students who are interested and getting started?
What I suggest when you're getting started is that you need to have a very, very strong motivation during your start, because when you're starting competitive programming, you're definitely not going to be good at it. Like chances of you being good at competitive programming from the start are very less. So it's very disheartening at the starting and very scary for the same reason. And you lose motivation in the start because you're not able to solve more problems, and because you're not able to solve problems, they don't click to you. It doesn't become very appealing to you. So my suggestion during that time is that you need to realize that you're not going to be good at something because you start. You're going to have to stick for it at least a couple of weeks or a couple of months to make sure that you at least have the hang of the basics and you're doing something good before maybe deciding that a competitive programming is not for you. So like during the start, even I faced this, is that my peers compared to me were way ahead than I was. So I could barely get even the starting problems or basics correct. But eventually what would happen is you'll get good at it, and the gap between you or your peers or whatever you're aiming for will reduce over time. And in the starting, like you need to understand that you need to look at it as you stop need to measuring how far you have come. You need to start feeling good about solving new problems or learning new concepts. If you like focus more on learning new concepts and enjoying the process more, it gets easier. I think someone shouldn't start measuring competitive programming performances at least till he gets like the basics and moves along some point.
Yeah, that's a really nice suggestion for someone. Like they should be consistent, and they should look at the competition once they have the basics clears. And even if you are doing the CP from very long time, uh, there is no shame sometimes to look at the answers, but just to understand this. And once again, can you quickly mention some of the resources to learn CP and crack for the ICPC?
Well, the platforms that I mentioned, HackerRank, CodeChef, and CodeForces, all of these three platforms have regular contests that you can participate in. They will have blogs, discussion material, practice problems, tag-wise searches that you can go and learn from them. There are also sites that are dedicated just for study material like 𝗣𝗿𝗰𝗲 and Geeks for Geeks. These sites are good when you want to just go through some topic and learn what the topic is and basics of that topic. Maybe some practice problems would also help you out. Apart from these, if you're following some kind of book or structure, what I generally suggest is to not fiddle around a lot of these topics. Like to limit the number of places you're visiting is a good choice. Like what I did in my time was that I constrained myself to 2 programming sites and one handbook, so that I do not deviate a lot. Because what would happen if you learn from various sources all the time, going from one source to the other, generally your understanding style would be incomprehensible. So like learning from a specific source all the time helps you to build that kind of understanding. So generally what is suggested is when you're in your initial days to go through easier beginner friendly platform like HackerRank or CodeChef. Then when you get better and better at it, to move to platforms like CodeForces, and for learning to first moving to Geeks for Geeks is easier for beginners, then moving to 𝗣𝗿𝗰𝗲, because some kind of a 𝗣𝗿𝗰𝗲 or sites like CodeForces expect some kind of prior knowledge that you have for formal understanding of these problems.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sarthak. Thank you very much for sharing your experience and the knowledge and the tips for our viewers, especially for the ICPC contest. Like, I didn't know that you should skip the questions because the same questions have the same point. Each question has the same point, so you should solve the first, which could be potentially faster. And you are also not allowed to use internet, so use your template or make your own template. Can you talk about, while making the template, what are the things they should keep in mind?
Well, what basic things we should keep in mind is that first, for templates, you're going to get the page count limit that you're the maximum page count limit that you can carry in your offline regionals. You're also going to get the format, like the word size, the format text size that you can get into your templates. So that should be kept in mind so that you do not miss out on that. Otherwise, they straightforward reject your templates. Then when you're out of time, if you had to code it out on your own, one such example is like problems, a portion where you solve some intuitions and observations in graph problems, then bring it down to some standard algorithm. And those standard algorithms, probably it would be better to carry a template so that you do not mistake while you're writing. But then there are also cases that you should not take large amounts of, basically, you should not take codes that you could have typed on your own. You should not take data structures and algorithms that you yourself know. So basic DPs that should not be a part of your template. It's generally based on what you think will help you solve problems. The best way to objectively do that is that when you give practice contests, right, you can iteratively identify that if I had this snippet, I would be able to solve this problem. So that snippet should.
You will get it from the experience, and the one that will take you more time that you should, rather than the one that is just like, okay, this is, I will just copy paste because I don't want to repeat it over and over again. Okay, thank you very much, Sarthak, for coming, sharing your experience. I did actually myself learn about a lot ICPC and computer programming, and I hope that our viewers potentially also got to learn a lot about this. And thank you very much again for coming to us and sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me here, Rahul. And thank you for everyone for joining in.
Okay.